The sound that filled the most expensive restaurant in the city wasn't the quiet clinking of glasses or the soft hum of polite conversation. It was the booming, ugly sound of my father-in-law's laughter. It bounced off the crystal chandeliers and seemed to make the velvet curtains tremble. The manager, a man who looked like he had never smiled in his life, stood perfectly still beside our table. In front of me sat a simple black leather folder, but inside that folder was a number so big it looked like a mistake. $150,000. "That's a good one," Walter, my father-in-law, roared, slamming his meaty hand on the pristine white tablecloth. The tiny, delicate salt shaker jumped. "You almost got us. For a second there, I actually thought this fancy meal cost as much as a house." My mother-in-law, Agnes, was right beside him in her performance. She dabbed a perfectly manicured finger at the corner of her eye, pretending to wipe away a tear of mirth. "Oh, Clara dear, did you see your face?" she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "You looked like you were going to faint. Priceless. Absolutely priceless." They both turned to me, their eyes gleaming with a shared, cruel victory. This was their big moment. This was the grand finale of their 45th wedding anniversary celebration, a dinner that was supposed to be in their honor. But it wasn't about them. It was about me. It had always been about me. My husband, Leo, sitting beside me, looked pale. His knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of the table. He opened his mouth to say something, probably to defend me, but his father cut him off. "Well, go on, dear," Walter smirked, gesturing to the bill with a flick of his wrist. "Time to pay up. After all, you're the one who made the reservation. You handled everything so beautifully." He let the compliment hang in the air, knowing it was poison. Then came the part they had rehearsed, the final crushing blow. "Oh, wait!" he exclaimed, his voice full of mock surprise. He began patting the pockets of his tailored suit jacket, a look of comical confusion on his face. How silly of me. It seems Agnes and I forgot our wallets. And our credit cards. We must have left them on the dresser in our haste to get here. Agnes played her part perfectly. "Oh dear, I think you're right, Walter," she gasped. "We were just so excited. My goodness, what a silly mistake to make." They erupted in laughter again. It was a loud, arrogant sound designed to draw attention from every corner of the silent, staring room. They wanted everyone to see me. They wanted every person in this restaurant, people who dripped with wealth and power, to see the poor, simple girl who had married into their family and was now stuck with a bill she could never, ever pay. They were waiting for me to panic. They were waiting for the tears, the frantic phone calls, the utter humiliation. They were waiting for me to break. I could feel Leo's leg jiggling nervously beside mine. He was looking at me, his eyes pleading, though he didn't know what for. For 3 years, I had swallowed their insults, endured their little games, and smiled through their thinly veiled hatred, but they had underestimated me, they always had. I did not cry. I did not panic. A strange, quiet peace settled over me, a feeling I had been waiting for a very long time. My hand was perfectly steady as I reached for my glass of water. I took a slow, deliberate sip, the cool liquid a welcome contrast to the burning stares of my in-laws. I placed the glass down on the table with a soft, definitive click. Then, I looked up, meeting Walter's eyes first, then Agnes's. Their smiles were still plastered on their faces, but they were beginning to look a little strained. My silence was not part of their script. Their laughter died suddenly when I calmly said, "Don't worry, it's already been taken care of. I knew you would do this. 3 years ago, I thought love was enough. I was naive. I believed that because Leo and I loved each other so deeply, his parents would eventually see past my simple background and accept me. I learned how wrong I was the night of our engagement party. It wasn't a celebration, it was an inspection, and I was the specimen pinned under the microscope. The party was held at their mansion, a place so large and cold it felt more like a museum than a home. Marble floors echoed with the whispers of guests whose shoes cost more than my car. From the moment I walked in, I felt their eyes on me, judging the simple navy dress I had spent a month's savings on. Agnes greeted me at the door with a kiss that never touched my cheek. Her eyes scanned my dress, a tiny, dismissive smile playing on her lips. "How quaint," she murmured, the word hanging in the air like a little puff of poison. It was her favorite weapon, a compliment that felt like a slap. Leo squeezed my hand, a silent apology, but he was quickly pulled away by his father. Walter spent the next hour parading Leo around the room like a prize pony. I stood by the appetizer table, trying to look like I belonged while his voice boomed across the room. He wasn't telling stories about Leo's childhood. He was loudly reminiscing about Leo's ex-girlfriends. "Remember Amelia?" He'd bellow to a group of men in tuxedos. "Her father owns half the shipping industry in this state, a fine girl from good, wealthy stock." He was talking to them, but his words were aimed directly at me. He was drawing a map of the world I didn't belong to and making sure I knew it. The real test came later. After most of the guests had left, Walter clapped his hands together. "Leo, Clara, join us in the study for a moment. A little family business to attend to." The study was dark and intimidating, lined with books that looked like they had never been read. A heavy oak desk stood in the center of the room like a judge's bench. Walter and Agnes sat behind it, and Leo and I were ushered into two smaller chairs facing them. It felt like an interrogation. Walter slid a thick bound document across the polished wood. "A prenuptial agreement," he announced, his voice void of any warmth. "Just a formality, you understand, to protect the family legacy." I could feel Leo tense up beside me. "Dad, we talked about this. It's not necessary." "Nonsense, son," Agnes cut in, her voice smooth as silk. "It's just smart planning. Any sensible young woman would understand." They both stared at me, their expressions identical. It was a trap, and we all knew it. They expected me to cry, to get angry, to accuse them of thinking I was a gold digger. They wanted a fight. They wanted me to show my true colors so they could turn to Leo and say, "See, we told you so." I picked up the document. It was heavier than I expected. I didn't look at Leo. I didn't look at them. I simply began to read. Page after page of legal language, all of it designed to say one thing: you get nothing. I read about the family trusts, the properties, the stock portfolios I would never have a claim to. I read every line, every clause. When I finished, I placed the document neatly back on the desk. The silence in the room was so thick I could feel it pressing on me. Walter cleared his throat, ready to argue, but I spoke first. "Do you have a pen?" I asked quietly. Agnes blinked, her carefully constructed composure faltering for a second. Walter slid a heavy, gold-plated pen across the desk. I picked it up, turned to the last page, and signed my name on the line they had so carefully prepared for me. I pushed the document back toward them. I finally looked up and met their stunned gazes. "I am marrying Leo," I said, my voice even and calm. "Not your bank account." Their plan had completely backfired. There was no relief in their eyes, only shock and a new, deeper kind of suspicion. They couldn't understand me. A person who wasn't interested in their money was a creature they had never encountered before. My quiet compliance didn't end the war. It just made them more determined to find a different way to win it. After the engagement party, I had hoped things would get better. I thought that by signing the prenup, by showing them I wasn't after their money, they might soften. But their war against me wasn't a loud, declared battle. It was a quiet, relentless siege. It was death by 1,000 cuts, each one small and seemingly insignificant. But together, they were designed to bleed me dry of all my confidence and joy. The first cut came a month after we were married. We were having dinner at their house, and I had worn a new dress and brought my one expensive handbag, a gift from my own parents who had saved for months to buy it for me. I was proud of it. As I was telling a story, Agnes reached across the table for the gravy boat and with a theatrical gasp, lost her grip. Brown, greasy gravy cascaded directly onto my pale leather bag. "Oh my heavens! I am so terribly clumsy!" she cried, but her eyes were sparkling. Leo jumped up to help, grabbing napkins, but the stain was immediate and deep. Walter just grunted. That's what happens when you buy cheap things, they fall apart. The bag wasn't cheap, and it hadn't fallen apart. It had been attacked. I spent the rest of the dinner with a forced smile on my face, the ruined bag sitting by my feet like a dead animal. There was no real apology, just a series of little pats on my arm from Agnes, who kept saying how dreadful she felt, all while looking perfectly pleased. The cuts kept coming. For Leo's 30th birthday, Walter and Agnes threw another lavish party. Their gift to him was a brand new, gleaming black sports car, parked right at the entrance with a giant red bow on it. Walter made a grand speech about how a man of Leo's stature needs a proper vehicle to represent the family. Everyone cheered. Then, he turned to me. "And we didn't forget you, Clara," he said, pulling a small, thin envelope from his pocket. He handed it to me in front of everyone. I opened it. Inside was a $20 gift card to a generic big box store. "I'm sure you can find something nice for your little kitchen," he said with a wink. The laughter from their friends was polite, but the message was clear. Leo was royalty, and I was the help. I remember looking at that gift card, the plastic feeling slick and insulting in my hand, and feeling my cheeks burn with a shame that wasn't mine. They chipped away at me constantly. My cooking was so rustic. My career in data analysis was a cute little hobby. They would constantly bring up Leo's brilliant future and how important it was for him to have a partner who could keep up. Every word was a tiny pinprick, designed to make me feel small and unworthy. But the deepest cut, the one that truly changed things, happened about a year ago. We were staying at their mansion for the weekend when a family heirloom, a diamond bracelet, went missing from Agnes's jewelry box. She didn't accuse me directly. That wasn't her style. She was much more clever than that. Instead, she spent the entire day in a state of quiet, sorrowful panic. She would sigh heavily in every room I entered. She spoke to Walter in loud whispers about how the bracelet had been in the family for generations, and then came the line that was meant for me. "One just hates to think it," she said to no one in particular, staring at a wall just past my head. "But you hear such stories. New people in the family can't always be trusted." Leo was furious. He confronted them, his voice shaking with anger. "How could you? How could you even suggest Clara would do something like that?" He defended me, fiercely and beautifully. But the accusation hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The rest of the day was unbearable, a silent war where I was the enemy combatant. The next morning, Agnes came down to breakfast, humming. "Oh, you'll never guess what," she announced cheerfully, holding up her wrist. The diamond bracelet was sparkling on it. "It must have slipped behind the dresser." Silly me. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the poison she had spread, of the pain she had caused me. She just moved on as if nothing had happened. That was the moment a deep crack formed, not in my love for Leo, but in my belief that our love could conquer his parents. I saw that his defense, while noble, was like trying to patch a sinking ship with his bare hands. He could fight them, but he couldn't stop them. They would just find another way to hurt me, another way to make me feel like an outsider. That day, looking at Agnes's triumphant, unapologetic face, I understood something with cold, hard clarity. Leo couldn't save me from them. If I was going to survive, I would have to save myself. The decision to save myself wasn't a loud declaration. It was a quiet internal shift, a clicking into place of a gear I didn't even know I had. The perfect opportunity to test it arrived on a bright Sunday morning, during one of our mandatory family brunches. The piece was, as always, fragile, ready to be shattered by one of Agnes's carefully aimed remarks. She waited until the maid had cleared our plates before she began. "Walter, darling," she said, her voice light and airy. "I was just thinking, our 45th anniversary is just around the corner. We must do something truly special." Walter puffed out his chest. "Only the best for you, my dear. Name the place." Agnes gave a thoughtful hum, tapping her chin. You know, I heard the mayor himself couldn't get a table at Aurelia last month. They say it's booked for the next 5 years. Can you imagine? I knew exactly where this was going. Aurelia wasn't just a restaurant, it was a myth, a ghost of a place whispered about in magazines where every plate was a work of art and the guest list was a secret. Getting a reservation wasn't a matter of calling ahead. It was a matter of being invited into a club that had no doors. It was the most impossible reservation in the city. And then, her eyes, sharp and bright as a bird's, landed on me. "Clara, dear," she said, her voice now dripping with that familiar poisonous sweetness. "You're so clever with these things, so resourceful. Why don't you handle the reservation for our anniversary dinner? Our treat, of course." It wasn't a request. It was a sentence. They were handing me a shovel and expecting me to dig my own grave of humiliation. I could already hear the conversation in a month's time. Oh, poor Clara tried her best, of course. But what can you do? Some doors just don't open for certain people. Leo saw the trap immediately. "Mom, that's not fair," he started, his voice tight. "No one can get a table there. Let's just go to the Grand. I'd be happy to," I said, my voice cutting through his protest. The table went silent. Leo looked at me, his expression a mixture of confusion and concern. Walter and Agnes looked at me with open surprise, which they quickly hid behind smug smiles. They thought my quick agreement was a sign of my naivety. They thought I didn't understand the game. "Excellent," Walter boomed, clapping his hands. "That's settled then. I'm sure you'll handle it perfectly, dear." He was already savoring my failure. Later that afternoon, back in the quiet of my own home, I didn't go online to search for a phone number that didn't exist. I didn't try to pull any strings. I walked to my bookshelf and pulled out an old, worn photo album. I flipped through the pages until I found it. A picture of my father, his face crinkled in a wide smile, his hands covered in flour. He was standing next to a much younger man with intense, hopeful eyes, the two of them in front of a tiny, run-down storefront. My father was a baker. He didn't have money or influence, but he had a different kind of wealth. He was rich in kindness. He saw potential in people. The young man in the photo was a chef with big dreams and empty pockets. My father gave him a small loan, not from a bank, but from his own meager savings, to help him start his first tiny bistro. He never asked for the money back. He just asked the young man to one day pay the kindness forward. That young man was named Alistair, Mr. Alistair, the now legendary owner of Aurelia. I picked up the phone. I didn't introduce myself as Clara, Walter's daughter-in-law. I didn't mention Leo's last name. I made a single phone call. "Mr. Alistair, this is Clara," I said. "Daniel's daughter." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, and then a voice, warm and full of emotion, said, "I've been waiting for this call for 20 years. The next Sunday at brunch, I waited until dessert was served. Then I placed a small, elegant card on the table. It was a reservation confirmation for 4, at Aurelia, for the night of their anniversary. Walter and Agnes stared at it, their forks frozen halfway to their mouths. The stunned silence was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Walter was the first to recover, snatching up the card. He blustered, "Well, my name must have finally gotten to the top of the list, knew it would open doors." He could believe what he wanted, I just smiled. Their perfect trap had snapped shut, but I wasn't the one caught inside. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that they were already planning a new one. Walter's bravado was a flimsy shield, and I could see right through it. For the rest of that brunch, he paraded the reservation card around as if it were a trophy he had won himself. But every time he thought I wasn't looking, I saw him exchange a glance with Agnes. It was a look of pure, undiluted fury. Their plan to publicly shame me hadn't just failed. I had turned it into a victory. And people like them could not stand to lose. In the weeks leading up to the anniversary, their behavior towards me changed. The tiny, passive-aggressive jabs stopped. Instead, they became sickeningly sweet. Agnes would call me just to chat, her voice like honey laced with arsenic. Walter would send articles to a family group chat about the legendary dishes at Aurelia, adding comments like, "Can't wait to try this. Hope you're ready for a big bill, Clara. Haha." Their kindness was a new kind of weapon, and it was far more terrifying than their open hostility. I didn't need to be in the room to hear their conversations. I could imagine them perfectly, sitting in their cold, sterile living room, whispering and chuckling as they built their new, far more dangerous trap. I could practically hear Agnes, a wicked glee in her voice, saying, "She thinks she's so clever, Walter. Let's see how clever she is when she's faced with a bill that could bankrupt her little family 10 times over." And I could hear Walter's booming reply, "We'll order everything, the oldest wine, the rarest food. And when the bill comes, we'll just laugh. She'll have to call her poor little parents to bail her out. The humiliation will be magnificent." They were constructing a golden trap, a beautiful, expensive evening that would end with my utter ruin. They thought I was walking into it blindly, dazzled by the glamour and too naive to see the jaws waiting to snap shut. What they didn't know was that I was having my own quiet conversations. A few days after securing the reservation, I called Mr. Alistair again. "They're not happy," I told him, my voice low. "They see this as a challenge." "I expected as much," he replied, his tone serious. "Your father told me once that true character isn't shown in how a person handles failure, but in how they handle someone else's success." I took a deep breath. "I need to ask you for a favor, a big one. It's not about the reservation anymore. It's about justice, I suppose." And then I told him everything. I told him about the prenup, the ruined handbag, the gift card, the missing bracelet. I told him about the years of being made to feel small and worthless, the 1,000 little cuts designed to make me bleed. He listened patiently, without interrupting once. When I was finished, there was a long pause on the line. "Your father was the kindest man I ever knew," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "He invested in me when I was nothing. It's time to repay that investment. What do you need me to do?" Together, we devised a plan, a very special plan, just for Walter and Agnes. The night before the dinner, Leo came to me, his face etched with worry. He had seen his parents' wicked excitement, and it scared him. "Clara, maybe we should cancel," he said, taking my hands in his. "We can say you're sick. My parents, they're up to something. I can feel it. I don't want to see you get hurt." I looked at my husband, at the man I loved who was trapped between the woman he chose and the parents he could never escape. I squeezed his hands gently. "Don't worry, Leo," I said, a calm, steady confidence flowing through me. "I'm not going to get hurt. Not this time." I gave him a small, mysterious smile. "It's going to be a night they'll never forget." Aurelia wasn't just quiet, it was hushed. The air itself seemed to be made of velvet and old money. But the moment Walter and Agnes walked through the grand entrance, that sacred silence was shattered. Walter strode in as if he owned the place, dismissing the maitre d' with a wave of his hand and loudly admiring a sculpture in the lobby. Agnes glided behind him, her eyes scanning the other diners, a faint, superior smile on her lips. They weren't there to dine. They were there to conquer. Leo looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. He kept murmuring apologies to the staff as we were led to our secluded table. I, on the other hand, felt a strange sense of calm. I was a spectator at the theater, and the final act was about to begin. They thought they were the predators circling their prey. They had no idea they were the ones in the cage. The performance began the moment the menus were presented. They were not menus, really, but heavy, leather-bound books. Walter didn't even open his. "Bring us your oldest bottle of wine," he commanded the sommelier. "The one you tell stories about." When the sommelier hesitated, mentioning the astronomical price, Walter just laughed. "Son, we're not here to count pennies." The bottle arrived, presented like a holy relic, and so it began. They ordered with a theatrical flair that was both absurd and deeply cruel. oysters with pearls of rare vinegar, a terrine made from ingredients I couldn't pronounce. Every time the waiter described a dish, Agnes would ask, "Is that your most exclusive?" The main course was the crescendo of their arrogance. Walter ordered the Japanese steak, the one that famously came with a certificate of authenticity and was covered in edible gold leaf. Agnes chose the lobster, a creature so large it looked prehistoric, which had apparently been flown in from a private cove in Maine that very morning. With every extravagant order, Walter would turn to me, a glint in his eye. He'd pat my hand, his touch feeling like a spider crawling on my skin. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about the price, dear," he'd say, his voice loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Tonight, you live like us, a little taste of the good life." They believed my silence was fear. They mistook my calm for paralysis. They saw me taking small sips of water, quietly observing them, and thought I was calculating the impossible debt I was falling into. They couldn't have been more wrong. I was simply memorizing the details for later. Leo tried, feebly, to intervene. "Dad, maybe that's a bit much," he'd whisper, only to be shot down by a sharp look from his mother or a dismissive wave from his father. He was a ghost at his own family dinner, his discomfort completely ignored. Finally, after a dessert that involved crystallized flowers and sugar spun into a golden birdcage, the meal was over. The battlefield was clear. Walter leaned back in his chair, patting his stomach with a satisfied groan. Agnes delicately wiped her lips. This was it, the moment they had been planning for weeks. The manager, Mr. Alastair himself, approached our table. His face was a mask of perfect professionalism. He held the black leather folder in two hands, presenting it as if it were a death sentence. He placed it in the center of the table, directly in front of me. Walter grandly gestured for him to open it and present the total. He wanted the number to be announced, to echo through the room. Mr. Alastair simply opened the folder and turned it for Walter to see. For a single, breathtaking second, there was silence. Walter's eyes widened. A slow, wicked grin spread across his face. He looked at Agnes, who was already beaming. The performance was about to reach its climax. He took a deep breath, ready to deliver his killing blow, and burst into a magnificent roar of laughter. "Oh, daughter-in-law!" he boomed, the sound ricocheting through the restaurant. "We didn't bring our wallet or cards!" Agnes joined his laughter, a high, piercing sound that made my teeth ache. They leaned back in their chairs, their faces flushed with triumphant glee, watching me, waiting for me to shatter. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath, all eyes on the girl who had been so thoroughly and publicly destroyed. The laughter hung in the air for a moment, thick and suffocating, before it died. It didn't fade away, it was snuffed out like a candle flame in a sudden vacuum. Walter and Agnes stared at me, their triumphant smiles frozen on their faces, slowly cracking like old paint. The noise of the restaurant, which had dimmed to a collective gasp, seemed to vanish entirely. "What are you talking about?" Walter finally blustered, his voice losing its booming confidence. It was smaller now, laced with confusion. "Taken care of? What do you mean you knew we would do this?" I didn't answer him directly. Instead, I turned my gaze to the manager, who stood impassively beside our table. "Mr. Alastair," I said, my voice perfectly level. "Would you be so kind as to explain the legacy menu to my in-laws?" Mr. Alastair gave a slight formal bow. He stepped forward, his presence filling the space. "Of course, madam," he said, his voice resonating with quiet authority. He turned to Walter and Agnes, who looked like two cornered animals. "Everything you ordered this evening, the vintage wine, the imported lobster, the gold leaf steak, was part of a unique, off-menu experience we created especially for your anniversary. We call it the legacy menu." Walter scoffed, trying to regain control. "Legacy menu? What nonsense is this? It's just food." "Not quite, sir," Mr. Alastair continued smoothly. "The price of this menu isn't just for the ingredients, it is a pledge. You see, the entire sum of your bill, $150,000 is a mandatory, non-refundable donation. Agnes let out a small, strangled sound. Mr. Alistair's eyes, sharp and clear, found Walter's. It will be transferred tomorrow morning to the city's largest children's hospital fund, the very same charity, I believe, that your company has publicly claimed to be a major supporter of for the last 5 years, despite their records showing not a single dollar ever received. The color drained from Agnes's face. She looked like a ghost. Walter's jaw worked silently, opening and closing like a fish on land. Their clever, cruel prank had just become a legally binding contract for public decency, witnessed by a room full of the city's elite. And how could you possibly afford a deposit on such a thing? Agnes hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. You have nothing. That's where you're wrong, I said softly. I finally looked directly at her, letting her see the woman she had tried so hard to break. The prenup you insisted on was the best gift you ever gave me. You made it clear I could never rely on your family's wealth. So, I decided to build my own. I paused, letting the words sink in. For the past 2 years, I have been running a tech consulting firm. It's become quite successful. The look of utter disbelief on their faces was more satisfying than any revenge, but I wasn't finished. There was one final cut to make, and this one would be the deepest. Speaking of business, I continued, reaching into my purse, I heard Walter's company was on the verge of bankruptcy a month ago. A terrible investment, I believe. And then a last-minute emergency bailout from an anonymous benefactor saved everything. I pulled a document from my purse and slid it across the table. It was a single-page shareholder report. I was that anonymous benefactor. Walter's eyes darted down to the paper. He saw the name of my firm, and next to it, the percentage of shares it now held, 51%, controlling interest. I leaned forward slightly. The family legacy you were so desperate to protect from me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, is now mine. Complete, shattering silence. The arrogance, the pride, the cruelty. It all evaporated, leaving 2 hollow shells sitting at the table. Then I felt a hand cover mine. I looked up to see Leo, his eyes shining with a mixture of shock, awe, and a profound sadness for what his parents were. He had finally seen them for what they truly were, stripped of their power and wealth. He stood up, pulling me gently to my feet. We're leaving, he said, his voice firm and clear. We turned and walked away. We didn't look back. I could feel the stares of the entire restaurant on our backs, but they didn't matter. A weight I had carried for 3 years lifted from my shoulders with every step we took toward the door. We left them there, in the opulent silence of Aurelia. 2 silent, broken people, left alone to face the bill, the public humiliation, and the quiet, unassuming woman who now held their entire world in the palm of her hand.